So let's just get into it. How to support and grow native plants is the title of the talk, and really the answer, I tried to post the answer in this actual slide here. That's one of the ways. The way to support and grow native plants is to plant them everywhere in every available space, including balconies. So this is my 6th floor balcony in downtown Toronto, where I grow over 30 species of native plants. In these containers, and they're there all year round. I get lots of bees, birds visiting me frequently, and it's a wonderful little ecology, a little slice of ecology that I also get to appreciate on a daily basis, and it's an important thing for me in my life, especially in these trying times when we're all being pushed to our limits in terms of mental health. You know, this is my little therapy space as well. So okay, let's get into it. Okay, we've already done that. We know what the agenda is for the day. Wonderful. Here's me. I'm presenting myself here. That's me on my balcony with the little native white oak sapling. And then on the right is me from I guess about 6 years ago now, when I was doing my master's research on evening primroses, and that little yellow thingy there is a fairly uncommon species of evening primrose, which I had found after many days of looking for it, tracking down herbarium specimens, locations. I found it at the side of the road, and I was very excited. So I snapped a selfie. I don't often do that, but really I was just trying to capture my excitement. Yeah. So that's me. I am a botanist. I've been studying plants for over 10 years. I did an undergraduate at the University of British Columbia, master's, which this was part of, at U of T. I've worked at the Royal Botanical Gardens, the Royal Ontario Museum. Yeah, I've been in environmental consulting. I've been volunteering with NANPS for over 6 years now. Met them at the plant sale. We'll talk about plant sales a little bit later. And currently working at the World Wildlife Fund with a bunch of native planting things. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. I'll talk a little bit more about NANPS first, though. So NANPS is this wonderful volunteer-run organization that's all about preservation, restoration, education, and appreciation of North America's beautiful native flora. And in my view, I hope this is not too far to say, but I think what NANPS does so well is bring plants and people closer together through the sales, through talks like this, and through all of the things that we do at NANPS. Here's a little bit about what you get out of membership. There's the Blazing Star, CDEX, plant sale, and if you didn't already know, we also have conservation properties. These two wonderful places, which I'm very lucky to have visited both of them, and they're both really amazing spots with truly beautiful plants and animals living there. And it's a pleasure to be part of an organization that is preserving those little corners of our planet. I wanted to say a little bit more about plant sales, because that is how I got started at NANPS, and it's an important part of what NANPS does. And I'm sure that many of you, well, have already indicated through the poll that you're interested in learning more, that you want to be connected to plants through sales. So due to the circumstances of COVID, NANPS is not holding the plant sales that we typically do in the GTA. Instead, we're doing a kit pre-order curbside pickup situation, and just follow NANPS on our social media and visit the website to learn more about that as it occurs. And I think we maybe we'll be able to speak about that a little bit later. Also, this is my one little plug for my work with WWF and In the Zone, which is a partnership with Carolinian Canada. I'm happy to be able to say that this year is the second year of our rollout of native plants with the In the Zone garden tag at Loblaw garden centers, and this year there will be 145 locations in southern Ontario and Quebec, and you'll see those plants with those tags in those garden centers after May 10th. I think that's pretty cool. If you want to know which ones and when that's happening, just visit inthezonegardens.ca for more information. This is, okay, I lied. There's a little bit more about my work, but we don't need to get into all of this. This is just some of the stuff that I do. I create, help to create resources like these to help people, whether it's with maintaining their native plant gardens, their habitat gardens throughout the year, or choosing the right native plants for their garden, or learning how to plant container gardens. Those are the wonderful things that I get to do at my work. And these things are all available for you online if you visit us at In the Zone. Okay, and that's the preamble. So now we can get into the actual discussion. So I like to always start with definitions so that we're all on the same page. First of all, a garden. So what is a garden to me? It's a place where plants grow and people care for them. So really, I've updated this definition to be where plants and people are in relationship with each other. It's a give and take between people and plants. That's what's happening in a garden. And there's many different ways that that can happen. Ecology is the subject matter that I studied for my master's and undergraduate research. It's the science of the relationships, again, there's that word, between organisms, each other, and their environment. Native plants. So the definition that I'm going to use in this presentation is that native plants are the local regional flora which have been evolving for thousands of years in your region, whatever your region may be. And that means is that they've been adapting to local conditions for thousands of years, and they've also been co-evolving with other plants and animals, including insects, pollinators, for thousands of years. And that really does mean, by the way, that there's no substitute for them when it comes to restoring habitat and restoring wildlife, if that's what you're interested in, restoring pollinators. There's no substitute for native plants. No exotic species will ever do the same job. Ecological restoration is a subset of ecology in which we're restoring degraded and destroyed ecosystems for the benefits of people and non-human organisms as well. Being a steward or stewardship is when we're responsibly using and supporting our local environment. I'm your local botanist for the day. That's just a person, a student, or an expert in the study of plants. Habitat is a place that includes all of the life cycle needs of an organism. So that's not just food, could also be shelter, could be a place to raise young. There's many different things that go into an organism's habitat, and its habitat may also be spread over a large area. So your garden may be the entire habitat of certain organisms. It may also be just a part of a habitat, and maybe your neighbors or other people or other places are providing the rest of that habitat. Horticulture, which comes across vertically here, maybe because this is not really my expertise, but it's I think of it as the art of making gardens look nice. To me, life is beautiful, and gardening for life is a beautiful thing to do. And so when I garden, I really just try to replicate what I see in the wild. I try to support living organisms, and that's good enough for me. Maybe it's good enough for some of you. Maybe others of you have expertise in horticulture that you can bring to your gardens, and that's a wonderful thing too. But this is really just a caveat to say, if you have questions about aesthetics and horticulture, I likely will not be able to answer them, but I'll try. I'll certainly try. So all of these things, just keep them in mind. I try to incorporate these things, maybe with the exception of horticulture, into my daily practice, and I think everyone else can too. I want to talk a little bit big picture before we get into the smaller picture. So why might an organization like WWF, for example, be interested in native plants? Um, and why is this such a big issue now, today? Well, we're experiencing this thing that we're calling the dual crisis of biodiversity loss and climate change. Um, I mentioned that in ecology, ecology is the science of all of these relationships, and everything in ecology is linked to everything else. And unfortunately, climate change is linked to biodiversity loss. And so as one of those crises kind of advances, the other does as well in a terrifying kind of march situation. But something that you may have been hearing a lot about recently are things called nature-based solutions. So you may have been hearing about things like the 2 billion tree campaign or other tree planting initiatives, which can be the solution to our climate crisis. And although it's true, it is true that up to 30% of global greenhouse gas emission reductions that are needed to meet things like the Paris Climate Agreements can be achieved through tree planting, because trees are amazing. They're super, super good at sucking carbon out of the atmosphere and locking them into wood. Although that's true, it's also sometimes taken out of context and put into a sort of oversimplified is what I will say, because it can't really just be about planting trees. We also do have to reduce our carbon emissions. We do have to decarbonize. And actually, an interesting study I read recently that I'm happy to link after the presentation showed that you can't actually achieve this 30% number unless it's also tied with decarbonizing. The other important caveats here are that it can't just be about trees and forests. This has to be part of a restoration campaign that involves wetlands and shorelines and meadows and grasslands and all sorts of different things as well. And of course, if we were to do that and grow biodiverse ecosystems, then that would also help to reverse the biodiversity loss crisis, which is mostly about habitat loss, really about converting habitat into something that is unlivable by many species. Other things that are really important to keep in mind about this nature-based solutions thing is it really must proceed with the full consultation and leadership, really, of Indigenous people and communities. So it's doable. It can be done. We can achieve this nature-based solution thing, but it's not just about planting trees. That's all I really want to say about that. It's a lot more. And this picture here is of one of my favorite trees, which is, if you notice the little green dot. Actually, has anyone said in the chat what this tree might be? I wonder. In Toronto, if you see this green dot on a tree, it's a pretty good sign, unless you're in High Park. It's a pretty good sign that it's a specific type of tree. And I wonder if anyone could guess what that is. I'm going to check the chat really quickly. Does anyone want to guess? That bark is pretty... Oh, we're getting it. Ash. I've got 3 people. Nora, amazing. Patty, you're great. Brian, wonderful. Yes, Megan says black oak, and if you were in High Park, you're right. The green thing would mean that it was a black oak, but it is actually an ash, a white ash, in fact. And what's interesting about this is, so the city of Toronto has decided to protect its ash trees from the emerald ash borer by injecting them with a pesticide called triazine, which they do once every 2 or 3 years. And that keeps that wood locked into the trees. So actually protecting old trees turns out to be a really effective way of keeping carbon locked in the living body of the tree, instead of having it decompose and release that carbon into the atmosphere. So what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that it's not just about planting trees, you also have to protect trees too. And it's interesting to note that old trees are much, much, much more effective at supporting wildlife and sequestering carbon too. That's enough of that. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so the science of ecology. This is not going to be news to anyone here, but I said that it was about these relationships. And in studying ecology, the patterns that we learn about are fairly complicated. They are cyclical patterns, web-like patterns, and layered patterns, and they can all be layered on top of each other and combined in very complicated ways that can become difficult to wrap your head around. But it's interesting to note, and I'll just put it out there for this conversation, that this definition of ecological restoration is relevant and something that everybody can engage in. There's no barrier to entry here. And really, for terrestrial ecosystems anyway, what it comes down to is planting native plants. And you put native plants back where they used to be prior to colonization and industrialization of the landscape. Magical things happen, and the wildlife and the pollinators really just come right back. Here's a slide which I've taken from Carolinian Canada. So this is really the map that began the program in the zone that I work for. Was part of the initial stage of it anyway. And what we're seeing here in Southern Ontario, which it appears many of us in the audience are, Ottawa is not far away from this, and the pattern is really similar for Ottawa and a lot of other developed regions. And that is that the green areas here are the healthy, functioning ecosystems, chock full of native plants, lots and lots of habitat for many, many species. And this squiggly line here is the northern part of the Carolinian zone. The Carolinian zone, if you're not already familiar, is Canada's most biodiverse region, but also the region with the most species at risk. And the reason for that is these green areas represent only 15% of this entire landscape. The rest has been converted to agriculture or urban or industrial or transportation. And the analysis that was done by Carolinian Canada showed that if we want to see wildlife species recovering, we're going to need to get that number from 15% to 30% at least, if not greater. And although the protected areas in this region are very, very important for getting us there, it's not enough. We'll never get to 30% unless privately owned areas also start converting and restoring to habitat. And we need to do that by planting lots of native plants in every available space. Amazing. Okay, this is a fun slide. This is a new thing. So I wanted to do a little thought experiment for folks and say, let's take an area that is kind of like a little sketch of that landscape, that type of landscape. So here we have, let's say that a square here, one of these little squares is 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. So this whole area would be 10 kilometers by 10 kilometers or 100 squared kilometers. And let's say you wanted to restore that. In this example, I started at 10%. So there's 10% habitat and 10% developed area. So let's say you wanted to restore that, okay, to 30%. So you're going to add 20%, 20 little blocks of pretty densely planted native plant habitat. What would that take? What would it take to do that? And here you can see that I've done it by sort of expanding these little green areas and connecting them together. So connectivity being an important part. So I did a little bit of back of the envelope calculation, and what I came to was if you wanted to do this with both plants and trees, so I think that's a good way to address the dual crisis. If you were to do it just with plants, you wouldn't get as much carbon sequestration. If you were to do it with just trees, then it wouldn't be as biodiverse and it wouldn't be providing as much habitat. So I sort of did a 50-50 situation. What I found was you would need 1 million trees and 5 million plants within this little 100 kilometers squared area. And by the way, for reference, if you're familiar with the Toronto area, if you go roughly from the lake shore up to the 401 and roughly from sort of between the Humber and the Don Rivers, that would be a little bit more than a 100 kilometer squared area. You need to plant 1 million trees and 5 million plants there to get to this stage. So that's a lot. No joke. We don't even have that many plants, to be honest, folks. That's an issue. So something we need to address. But then we can go forward from this. So imagine if you started from that planting, and then through community engagement, the wonderful thing about plants is that they produce more of themselves. So from there, you could grow to something like this, where now it's a landscape that's 50% native plant habitat. And then from there, you could innovate and connect these places to get something like this, which would be, I call it the dream, a maximally functioning and integrated connected ecosystem where people and wildlife thrive together. Wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that be something very, very special? That's certainly what I would love to see. I think a lot of people here would like to achieve something like that too. So something to keep in mind, but there are a lot of things that would need to happen in order to get there. Okay, some other exciting things. Plants. What counts as the best native plants? I think anyone who belongs to the North American Native Plant Society probably already knows this, but for others watching, it's not just about having the word native plant on the title, on a tag in a garden center. There's a lot more that goes into the highest quality native plants. That means it has to abide by that definition that I gave up at the front. So local to your region, co-evolved with local wildlife and pollinators, adapted to local conditions, wonderful. But we also want genetic variation. And I could certainly get into this. I suppose if someone asks a question about it in the Q&A section, we can get into why genetic variation is so important. But it has to do with resilience, has to do with continued evolution and adaptation. And for that reason, I kind of I pause at the idea of nativars or horticultural cultivated varieties of native plants. And the reason for that is they don't have as much variation. By definition, they've been shaped into a particular way so that they have a particular color or a particular shape of flower, and the variation is not there. So personally, I avoid those for that reason, and NANPS does as well when we do our plant sales. Pesticides, evidently, if we want to support pollinators, we should not be spraying our plants with pesticides. Also, if we want to support wild native plant ecosystems, then it is not ethical to go find native plants out in the wild, dig them up, and put them in our gardens. I don't support that. NANPS does not support that. We want to protect what's already there while growing more plants. Source identification is a really interesting and important thing. So we actually want to know where the plants are coming from. So, for example, one of my favorite plants, wild Columbine, its wild distribution actually ranges all the way across Canada and down to as far south as Florida. And if you were to get a wild Columbine from Florida, technically it would be a native plant, but it would not behave the same way as an Ontario-sourced wild Columbine. And, for one thing, I wouldn't expect it to be as hardy and capable of withstanding the winters that we have here in Canada. So we actually want to have source identified plants that are local. And of course, I think that native plants are the best because they're beautiful and hardy. And I wanted to give this little highlight to something really cool that has happened in Ontario within the past just a few years, which is the incorporation of the Ontario Native Plant Growers Association, including at the time, this was from a little over a year ago. These were all of the nurseries that were involved in that organization, and it continues to grow. And they're growing more and more plants all the time, which I think is great. If we want to get to our goals, we're going to need lots and lots of plants and cooperation between these nurseries. So it's wonderful that they're doing that. Okay, here's some things that I like to think about. when I'm thinking about how we're going to get to this maximally connected and functional world, how do you know if your ecosystem is working, if your restoration project is functioning? So evidently the biodiversity thing is part of it. If we have declining wildlife across the country and the world, and if we restore habitat with native plants, we should see that biodiversity increasing. So more species and more numbers of those species too. So that's a wonderful thing in and of itself. But that's not all I like to think about. I like to think about more things. So ecosystem services as well, or like some people like to say now, ecosystem gifts, the things that nature gives us for free when it's healthy and happy. And this includes clean filtered air and water, stabilized soils, food, medicine, a place to learn and educate our children, and a place for mental health as well. There's been increasing evidence that the more green, the more nature you have around you, the more healthy you are. I certainly feel that when I'm spending time in nature myself. Um, it helps, definitely helps. Um, and then connectivity. So connectivity is another really, really important thing. In ecology, we talk about how patches of habitat are much more functional when they're connected to each other. So if you just have a patch over here and a patch over here and a patch over here and a patch over here, it doesn't really behave in the same way as the same area if it was all connected together and wildlife species were able to move between them. So that's really important. We want to see more connectivity. But what I also find really interesting is in that space where humans, in the human-dominated landscape, our gardens and green spaces can connect us to each other, to our neighbors, our communities, and to the land that we live on as well, which I think is a really special and important thing that we should we should build that into our garden spaces. I certainly like to. So I challenge all of you, it sounds like a lot of you are doing this already, but I challenge anyone watching to ask yourself, take another look at your green space and ask, what is it doing for biodiversity, habitat, ecosystem services, and connectivity? You should be able to answer many, many things, hopefully a few from each of these different categories. Find which species are using it as habitat. What are the things that you're getting out of the garden? And how is it connected to other green spaces, and how is it connecting to other people as well? And I think this is probably coming near the end here. And a really, really important point. So as we're doing all of this, I'm quite conscious that the conservation movement has sometimes been an inclusive movement, but sometimes not. And to me, I think it's very important to draw this distinction and to say that in this, we really should focus on underserved, marginalized neighborhoods, including places where Black and Brown people are dominant, immigrant communities, and lower income communities. And what's really interesting to note is I did a deep dive on urban ecology, and there are very, very clear patterns of socioeconomic status and access to nature. So if you look at the greenest parts of a city, any city, anywhere in the world, they're also tend to be the highest income. And those lower income neighborhoods are the grayest, or the ones with the least habitat, the least green space. So actually focusing on the issues and desires of these communities, I think, is a really, really important thing to consider as we're doing this. I also think, I mentioned this before, that it's critical to include extensive consultation and participation and leadership with Indigenous people and communities while we're doing this work. It's a little ironic and interesting that we're talking a lot about native plants, but where in what part of that are we talking about Indigenous people? So I find all of these patterns of habitat being converted and fragments of habitat and stressed little pockets here and there, the patterns of colonization and effects on indigenous communities are really similar in a lot of ways. So I think that's an important thing to bring into the conversation and consider. I also think it's important that we need to think about breaking down the system that got us here. So why did we get to only 15% functional habitat in the first place? If we're just trying to jam native plants in the ground and not thinking about this the structure in the system, I don't think it's ever going to work. And finally, we need to sustain this effort, because anyone who's a gardener knows that gardening never ends. It starts and then it just perpetuates forever. You don't ever get to be done gardening and you don't ever get to be done with stewardship either. And these are just a few examples of how I've been incorporating these things into my work, or ways that I've seen it done in Toronto. So I'll go through this. This picture on the left is from my community garden plot. That's not my plot, that's the welcome garden at the front. But Garrison Flats Community Garden is one where I have a plot and I grow native plants and food plants together in a sort of fusion garden. And it works. It's wonderful. You know, I attract the pollinators that help to pollinate all the rest of the crops and the food. And so next to this is a low income and previously industrialized area right next to what was once an abattoir. And the extra food that's produced in this garden, especially during COVID, a lot of people either neglected or were not able to come to maintain their plots. So the community garden grew extra food pollinated by the pollinators that I like to think I helped attract with my native plants. And we donated that to a shelter next door, thereby hopefully, you know, demonstrating that connectivity and inclusivity. Here at the top is another example of a project called Project Swallowtail that I'm a part of. Is a collaboration between a number of groups to densely plant native plants within this neighborhood area of West Toronto. And last spring in Toronto's Parkdale neighborhood, we did a plant share. So these are plants, some of which were purchased, but most of which were just splits from people's gardens. They dug up some extra plants here and there, or some seedlings, potted them up, and we gave them away for free in this area to a wide variety of very interested people. And these two wonderful human beings here, Angel and Junaid, were instrumental in this and helped gather the people to get this done. And we also used these plants and some others to plant out a garden which is just sort of south, just in front of this photograph, which we dedicated as a Black Lives Matter peace garden. And there's a wonderful story about that I can talk more about, but they're including, you know, an intersection of justice and environmental issues. And then these other two are wonderful photos from the Bickford Center that were done by a group called Red Urban Nation. And they are Indigenous land stewards in Toronto, doing work, doing art, doing gardens, and being stewards, and to great effect, I would say. I can speak more about that, but you know, it brings me great joy to see these giant strawberries and bumblebees and these 4 healing medicine plants hugely painted on a wall in the middle of downtown Toronto. I love it. So that's all I really have to say for the moment. I do have some plants to show. We could do a little bit of show and tell, but I'd like to get some questions first, I think. And all I want to say at this point is thank you for listening. And it's your task now to go do this. And I wanted to show you 2 of my little friends who are already doing it. These pictures were taken just a few weeks ago from my condo, where a wild columbine, seeds which I'm quite certain fell from my balcony garden, have established themselves in the cracks of the bricks here. and we have some wild strawberries also finding a little home for themselves amongst the great landscape of downtown Toronto. So if these plants can do it, then you can do it too. And I hope you'll find a way. So Nasha, why don't you throw me some questions?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Great presentation. I wonder, Jason, do you want to speak about the sponsors first and do the announcements, and then we move on to questions?
Yeah, let's cover that off. And I've got a highlight of the questions here. I've kind of gone through the chat and
awesome. Yes.
pick the ones that have come through so far. But yeah, definitely want to thank Ottawa Biosphere Eco-City, as well as the rest of the folks that helped out from the NANPS board. And of course, TD Friends of the Environment Foundation, as one as sort of one of our presenting sponsors this afternoon. So I think, yeah, I think getting to the questions is a great idea. I've got a couple here highlighted. Keep them coming through the chat. We'll see how many we can get to. First one here from Susanna, just about how, what's the best way to sort of identify plants that are non-native, just to ensure that you're not doing anything in your gardening that might disrupt them?
Yeah, good question. So identifying plants. There's the old answer and then the new answer. I'll give both of them. So in the olden days, before technology, you'd have to go through field guides and extensive floras, and you'd be doing these dichotomous keys, which I still do it sometimes. It's quite fun. There's some resources I can point you to, including Michigan Flora, or the eFlora, or no, sorry, what's the I'll post some websites in the chat that you can visit to do that old school kind of thing. But actually, the thing that I'm recommending more and more that people do is just use iNaturalist. If you have iNaturalist, it's an app you can download on your phone. You take pictures, or you can get it on a desktop too. Yeah, John is there. Yeah, Olivia is also there. iNaturalist for sure. You take pictures of your plants, native or non-native, and you can also do this with animals, by the way, any kind of insect or bird or whatever you can get a photo of, upload it to the app, and a very smart computer algorithm will attempt to identify it if you don't know, or you can take a guess. But in any case, it goes up onto this basically social network in which other people will come in and help you identify it. And if it gets identified by 3 people as a confirmed ID, then it actually can be used for research purposes, which is pretty cool. So I definitely recommend all of you use iNaturalist. Certainly if I was starting out as a naturalist now, that's what I would be using to learn for sure.
Awesome. Okay, next one from Sam. Just bought on Lake Erie, lots of land, sandy loam. Don't have a clue what to plant.
Okay, well, don't have a clue what to plant. So use the ecological reference hypothesis. That's what I would do. So take your garden area, a place that you want to plant, and go find an area with similar conditions, so similar light and moisture and soil conditions. You say you've got sandy loam, that's great. So find another place with sandy loam, similar light and moisture, and then just observe what are the native plants that grow in that reference place. And those plants will likely do well in your garden too. So just explore, use that iNaturalist app, and figure out what's growing near you. That's a great place to start, I would say. I would say that. The other thing that I would say is if you're unsure to start of what specific things are going to work in your garden, and you're just starting from scratch, I like to start with more species, so more diversity than I expect to end up with. So if you want to end with, say, 10 species, start by growing 15 or 20 species and then see which ones are going to grow really well, which ones are not going to do so well. And you'll actually learn more by observing those changes over time as well. And just get started. Start with one species if you want. Don't be paralyzed, please. Just try something to begin with.
Next one. Question here from Nora. How close do patches need to be quote unquote connected?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the answer is it really depends on who you're talking about. So you can be connected from the perspective of a bumblebee, but not connected from the perspective of a salamander, because different species move around in different ways. So it really depends, I would say, is what matters. If you're talking about flying, insects or birds, then the connectivity doesn't necessarily have to be like a corridor, a direct corridor, because they can actually fly from patch to patch. So in that case, actually just increasing the density of native plants in an area is a good way to do that. Whereas if you're trying to restore habitat for turtles or amphibians that really need to like crawl along the ground, then the connection has to be like, there can't be any separation really. There needs to be physical continuous pathways for them all the way across. So that is a non-answer, but biology is complicated. I'm sorry.
That's great. So here's a question. It's more of a riff off of something in the comments here, but question about what's a good way to incorporate native plants in sort of an inexpensive way, given that it can be expensive at times.
Yeah, so I would say if I was trying to do native plant gardening on a budget, I would do with seeds. I would start with seeds. And originally, so some time ago, I would have said it's going to be challenging. You're going to really be struggling. But I have a method for you, which is a good and exciting method, which is to stratify your seeds in a tray outside. So just get a flat, like a tray that you would use to propagate seeds, for example. They cost a few dollars at a garden center. Fill it with potting soil, sow your seeds into the top of that in the fall. This is all happening in the fall. And then you need to protect it in some way. So if it's at ground level, you might need to put some like metal grating or something over it, and probably some leaves too to kind of insulate it. And then I did this on my balcony last year, so I also put it in some sort of protective casing. I just used like shipping material, packing material, and leave it there for all winter. Then in the springtime, you can pull it out from under that, pull the leaves off, and the seeds will germinate. This year I did that with 2 trays, and I have over 100 little baby seedlings coming up. It's working amazingly well, and I have more plants than I know what to do with. So if I was trying to start a garden in that way, I would be good to go. And where are you going to get the seeds from? Well, basically, I would say follow the same criteria that I laid out previously. A lot of the native plant growers will also provide seed packets or seeds for you. Wild harvesting of seeds, we have a guide for that on the NANPS website, don't we? There's a way to do that which is ethical, and that is that you're not going to deplete the entire population of seeds, but you also have to be aware of permitting restrictions. So just, not necessarily saying that it's okay to go anywhere and just harvest seeds.
NANPS does have a seed exchange that we do run every year.
Yep.
So that's a great one. Seeds collected by our members.
One of the benefits of being a NANPS member, of course, yes. So you can get seeds from the Seedex. You can trade seeds with the Seedex, and those seeds have come from gardens mostly. So you don't need to worry about the source.
Awesome.
Okay, why don't we? Shall we do the little show and tell really quick? I have some plants next to me that I think would like to be on camera.
Yeah, Ryan,
that sounds great.
Okay, I'm gonna take my background off and swap to my external camera. Howdy. So here, I brought one of my containers with me indoors, so you can see what one of these containers looks like. So it's about 40 centimeters across by 40 centimeters deep. The substrate is mostly, this one is mostly just peat-based potting soil mix, like Pro Mix, for example. So peat and vermiculite. I mix in a little bit of compost or composted manure or vermicompost, whatever you like, into the top layer, and then I top up every year. I put in a couple of handfuls. So what have I got in here? Well, I have, these things are all coming up with the exception of the wild ramps that I planted recently. All of these are coming up from last year. So we have woodland strawberries, we have plantain leaf sedge, and we have in here, back here is zigzag goldenrod coming up beautifully, lots and lots of it. I love that. You can see I always leave my stems too. By the way, this is a witch hazel. I'm not sure if it's going to come back or not. I try shrubs sometimes because I'm ambitious, but it's not always a good idea. But I always leave my stems. The reason that I leave stems is because insects live in there. They overwinter in there, either as adults or eggs or pupae sometimes. So I always just leave the stems. I also just kind of think it looks cool. And they turn out to be nice, you know, kind of for other plants to grow up in between. It gives more of a natural look, I find, to have those stems left in there from last year. And then I have some other little guys over here that I wanted to show. So this is a green-headed coneflower, Rudbeckia laciniata, which grows so well in containers. This is a plant that I would say, if you have a small or medium-sized garden, is almost too aggressive to include in the garden, unless you're willing to continuously dig up and share. If you like to share, this is a good plant for you. Very, very beautiful, tall, coneflower type, sunflowery looking thing. And I also have golden Alexanders here. Beautiful host plant for the black swallowtail butterfly, also edible. Oh, and this one is also an edible plant too. These ones are from Native Plants in Claremont, one of our favorite nurseries to include in the plant sales. I have some Monarda fistulosa, wild bergamot here. I have a beautiful sanguinaria, bloodroot. And then this guy here is a spikenard, which are really fun for shade because they grow almost to be the size of a small shrub, but it's actually a herbaceous plant. So it dies back to the ground every year with nice flowers. Yeah, so it's just some fun things to show off for the time being. Oh, and there's a Canada wild rye hiding back there too. If anyone has questions about the containers, happy to explain a little bit more about that, but I also did an entire webinar for NANPS already that's posted on our YouTube channel, so you could check that out if you like to. I'll flip this around. Here, we're back. Okay. We're coming up to 5 o'clock, but I understand we can continue a little bit for more questions. Unless, were there any other announcements, Alice or Adam, anything that we should be talking about? Maybe garden video contest, for example? Adam, you're muted though. There you go, Adam. I think you're good.
Oh, okay. So yes, so based on the, we had a video garden contest in 2020, and the thing about that one was that was only like 2 months in terms of duration. So in 2021, we decided to make it from now to September, and that's the duration. So it's a longer duration for the contest. The idea was that to keep people engaged. You know, we promote native plants and at the same time reward them with their amazing, inspiring videos. You can see the details on our social media. So we have our Instagram, our Facebook page. I put it on LinkedIn group. Let's see if I can get the links up. Hold on. But anyways, I'll type them in. The deadline for the video contest is September 1st, 2021. You can submit it in an MP4 format, and it could be 3 minutes or longer. And you send it to naps@naps.org, which is our email. And yeah, so I'm looking forward to seeing those videos sometime before or after the deadline. So most of the details are on our website and on social media. I could go through all of that, but I figure you guys should just read it. As the cash prizes vary, determining on whether you're first place, second place, third place, or fourth place. And that's
Yeah, awesome.
That's
Thanks
it.
for sharing, Adam. So Adam will share the details of that contest. Alice, did you want to make an announcement about the plant sale in Toronto?
Yes, the plant sale committee has, because of COVID, we've decided not to have our usual floor sales or pre-ordering, but we are happy to say that we will offer some kits with pre-selected plants. And that's the reason for that is so that we don't have to get a whole lot of volunteers together to you know, do the preparation for the volunteer safety. The pickup date for the kits will be June the 5th. And the information will be going up on our website soon, so check the website, and I'll also be putting out an e-news as soon as it goes up on the website to give you the heads up about that. And I'm sure Adam will put it on social media.
Great, thanks for
And,
sharing, Alice. I also just wanted to make a quick announcement about plant sale options in Ottawa. So we've got the Native Garden Nursery run by Bozal, and they are expecting to prepare prepaid orders of plants to Ottawa on May 8th. And you order off the website. So I'll share the link for that, and that's an Ottawa option. They're also hoping to have a market at the Westboro market on May 8th, opening day. But again, that depends on COVID spacing protocols, and we'll update you if anything changes in regards to that. There's also a possible plant sale with Fletcher Wildlife Garden, and I'll also put the link in for that. And that's supposed to be in June. But it will most likely be a prepaid order pickup event. So I'll share the links to that. I think those were all the announcements we had for today.
I've got one last one.
Sure, Jason.
Thanks, that's okay. Thanks, Nasha. So there is another upcoming webinar that NANPS is putting on May 27th. It's going to be hosted by Janice Kale, and the subject for this one, Rewilding the Veggie Garden, Native Plants as Companions and Pollinator Powerhouse. So details, check out our website for details, namps.org. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Jason. So maybe we wanted to just continue with questions for whoever wanted to stay on. Our call is till 5:30, and Ryan's here to entertain us. So Jason, did you want to continue with some questions? I do have a list of other questions that we haven't addressed yet.
Sure, yeah, I can get to a few more that I've noted down. If there's others you see, just jump right in. I guess on the topic of vegetable gardens, any suggestions for companion plants for vegetable gardens?
Well, at my community garden, I mean, don't forget also that there are lots of edible native plants. I did a whole webinar with Lorraine Johnson, which is available. It's part of the Garden for Wildlife webinar series, which is on the WWF YouTube channel. But if you want to continue to grow your veggies and then grow companion plants, I'll just share the ones that I do. So I think wild strawberries really need to be growing everywhere. They're great ground cover. They're not going to compete with any of your veggie plants, and they'll sort of just ramble about in between. But I grow Virginia mountain mint, yellow giant hyssop, and nodding wild onion are my three sort of superstar companion plants that I do in my my veggie garden, and they're great. They're really fun.
Yeah, a quick one here from Olga. Is any part of Brampton in Carolinian zone? And if not, what zone is it?
Well, the Carolinian zone is kind of a somewhat nebulous thing. There is technically a northern boundary of it, but it really sort of grades into the shield. I would say that Brampton is on the northern edge of it. Certain Carolinian species you may not find very much of there, but you know, with climate change and plants moving their ranges, maybe pretty soon Brampton will be in the middle of the Carolinian zone. So I would say it is though. It's part of the it's part, especially the southern end of it for sure.
Let's see. Next one. Where can you get woolly thyme? This is from James.
I'm not sure specifically. Maybe someone else could put in the chat if they found woolly thyme at a grower. Oh, someone wanted me to type the three plants again, or put them in. So it was nodding wild onion, yellow giant hyssop, and Virginia mountain mint, along with strawberries, because we all need more strawberries in our lives.
Ryan had a couple other questions for you, and Jason, let me know if you've already addressed this. So Elizabeth Brown asks, is the Loblaws plant availability definitely not cultivars? She sometimes tried to buy native plants to find their cultivars when her expert friend has looked at them.
Yeah, so last year there was a bit of confusion when we did the Loblaw rollout, because there were the native plants with the in the zone garden tag, and those come from the vetted native plant nurseries, the very same ones that NANPS uses at our plant sales. But there were other plants that were called just native perennials, and those were, many of them, the nativars. We actually asked about this, my colleagues, and we couldn't figure out where they were from exactly. So upon pointing out to Loblaws that these plants were dubious, they stopped sourcing those actually. So the Loblaws garden centers that have the in the zone native plants this year should not also have the native perennials of dubious origin. So if you see that tag, the in the zone tag, they're not cultivars. Those are what's called wild type native species.
Okay, thank you. Let me see what else I have here. So Linda asked, are you concerned with using peat given that it is not renewable and is problematic in some areas? And if there are any alternatives to recommend?
Good question. So yeah, peat is there's a whole thing about peat. A few things that I want to point out about that. So one thing is there's a lot of concern about the sustainability of peat, especially in the United Kingdom, where peat comes from bogs, really old bogs, and has been harvested unsustainably for centuries as fuel, and now is still being used as potting material. In Canada, if you get Canadian sourced peat, it is actually regulated, and I don't know whether I want to say that it's sustainable, because you do have to dig up a wetland to get peat. There's no doubt about that. But also, Canada is covered by huge, vast amounts of peatlands across much of central and northern Ontario and Quebec and into the boreal zone. And I remember looking this up, that it's much, much, much less than 1% of all of the peatlands in Canada are farmed for peat. And they do also do replanting and sort of a rotation of restoring peatlands and then harvesting peatlands. So it's something to wrestle with for sure. But the alternative, the only alternative that I can think of to use is coconut coir, which I do use. Also, it comes from the husks of coconuts and is a pretty good substrate for potting for containers. However, coconuts don't grow in Canada. So you're then dealing with the sustainability issue of fossil fuels transporting that material here. So it's a bit of a balancing act. How do you deal with that? There's sustainability with harvest of wetlands on one side and fossil fuels on the other side. If you have a solution, if you have another idea, I would love to hear it. But that's all I can work with at the moment.
Yeah, it's unfortunately not a perfect world. I've got another question for you, Ryan, from Ian Anderson. What about plants introduced by settlers deliberately or via crop seeds brought over in the early years of young Canada, over 400 years ago in Quebec and Ontario, which have integrated into those regional environments?
Yeah, interesting question. So there's a lot of those species. Yarrow could be considered one of those. Wild yarrow does grow in northern Ontario and up in the boreal region, but much of what we're seeing in southern Ontario is probably introduced, but kind of incorporated in a certain way. Dandelions also. In wild habitats, dandelions, there's not very many of them. They're just sort of here and there. They've incorporated themselves in. I consider those to be naturalized species. So they're, if anyone has read the book Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, she has a really wonderful chapter about this called In the Footsteps of Nana Bojo. And she describes a way to become naturalized to place. And what it means is to integrate yourself, form relationships, don't displace those others that were here, and be useful. So she gives the example of English plantain as a naturalized species which has done all of those things and is really not causing any problems now. And of course, that type of intercontinental movement has been happening forever and will always continue to happen. It's just happening a lot more now, and some of the plants coming across are not really naturalizing themselves, or at least not right now. They are expanding very aggressively and displacing, and aren't really bringing much to the table. So it's a complicated answer, but the other way that I like to think about it is that exotic plants don't really need my help to establish in this area. If they're going to establish themselves, they're going to do that anyway. Whereas the native plants are struggling in a lot of places. They've been displaced, they're in fragmented and stressed habitats, and they really need to be reintegrated, and they need help and support in doing that. So that's why I focus on native plants for that reason.
Great, thanks, Ryan. Another question we've got here is, who inventories agriculture biodiversity in Canada? And that's from James Birch.
Who inventories agriculture biodiversity? I don't know the answer to that. I will list two names that come to mind that I don't know if I'm not an agriculturist, but two things that come to mind to me that may be related to this for this questioner are Seeds of Diversity, which is a group that is cataloging, I believe, and also supporting a diversity of heritage sort of food plants in North America. And then the other one that is interesting to look at, I don't know if this is what you're asking about, but is ALICE, so Alternative Land Use Systems, which is a group that prioritizes and tries to help farmers use marginal farmlands to grow native plant habitat. And they do some cool stuff too. So you can look at that.
Could you repeat the latter one, Ryan?
ALUS.
ALUS, okay, great.
Someone's very upset at me for calling dandelions naturalized. I think this is an issue, Alice, that I'm looking at you, that NANPS has been dealing with for decades, probably. I read an article from the Blazing Star, I think it was from the 80s, about naturalization of dandelions. So, John, I hear you. It's been a long road with dandelions. I'm sorry I've upset you.
I've got another question for you, Ryan. Does anyone have suggested native garden designs for beginners, like in a barren suburb? That's from Suzanne B.
Designs, eh? Native garden designs. Again, that's a horticulture question, and it's not my wheelhouse. So, where would I point you towards for that? I'm not sure. Maybe someone else can help. Could someone else please jump into the chat if you have garden design ideas for this questioner?
No worries, Ryan. And I've got one more at this time. So this is from John. He writes, I suspect a large proportion of native plants have been obtained by plant rustling. So how do we police this without having to always see the after effects and the degradation of local ecosystems? It's one thing to photograph the after effects, but how is enforcement to be done to catch the culprits?
I saw that one too, rustling. Maybe this person could define rustling, but I think that may mean that thing that I was talking about where you're digging up plants from the wild. I think it's quite a lot to say that that's a large portion. I mean, I haven't done any of that. Certainly.
Want me to answer that question?
Okay, John, go for it.
Okay, I've been documenting for several years plant rustling in the immediate area of Oshawa, Whitby, and Ajax. Could just about cry about some of the rustling that's being done. For instance, there's a woods in Ajax that I've been monitoring for the last 5 years. I went in there just within the last week and saw that half of the marsh marigolds were pulled out by digging them up from what I saw a year ago in April. I've also got a woods in North Oshawa. I suspect that an entire population of white trillium has been dug out from there. There was 30,000 trilliums in that woods. And I've got pictures of virtually the entire population has been removed. On the other side of the street, the same woods, the west section of the woods, there's an area 75 by 100 feet where there's no wildflowers. They've all been dug out. So if I could, I'd like to match the leaves from some of these plants to the leaves in some of these nurseries. And if I find the DNA is the same, it would be lovely to take these people to court and shut them down.
That's an interesting idea, John. Good luck with that. Can we move on to the next question?
Yeah, sure. So I've got a question here from Janet Thompson. I've been gardening for 12 years with native plants, and I find that my flower beds are not as flourishing as they once were. What do you recommend for amending sandy soil?
Yeah, so certainly, I think it's a good idea to add some organic material. Definitely in the wild, in nature, there's animals out there adding their droppings, their their fertilizer to the ecosystem. So if that's not happening in your garden, then maybe composting your garden waste or your food waste or something, adding a little bit of that. Doesn't have to be a lot, but adding some solid fertilizer on top of your garden in the springtime is probably a good idea to help build that organic material. Also, leaving the leaves. Don't forget. I can't believe I went a whole talk without talking about leaving the leaves. So if you have trees in your area that are dropping leaves on the ground, leaves will slowly compost. They also create habitat for lots and lots of different insects, including bumblebees, will overwinter in that, and the leaves will decompose into what's called leaf mold, which is a wonderful source of organic fertilizer for your garden.
Great. So we got another question here from Fern Levine. Is it okay to pick up seed pods from the ground along walking trails?
Well, I would refer you to my previous response. follow the guidelines on the NANPS website, I would say, around seed collecting. If they've dropped onto the ground, well, they could still be a food source for some animal. So it's something that no one's going to be able to tell you exactly what is ethical and what is not, unless, if you receive a permit for seed collecting, but even then, the permit authorities are not, nobody really knows. You have to make the decision yourself. Are you supporting this plant, this ecosystem, or are you depleting it? It's a moral decision that you have to come down to, I would say.
Great. I have another question here from Stefan. A subdivision is being built near me. I want to bring home and replant as many natives as I can before they're bulldozed. Is there a way to do this legally, ethically, and without cost? Again, I think that might be in the same.
Well, so that's what's called a salvage, a plant salvage, and it's the one time that I would say it could be all right to dig up the plants if they're doomed, if they're basically about to be bulldozed, then you could consider it. Certainly Adam and I are on the Restorations and Rescues subcommittee of NANPS, which originated as a salvaging operation. I don't know, Adam, if you want to talk more about that and the 407 expansion project. You were part of that, I believe, and I don't know.
I didn't participate in that one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I didn't participate. I participated in one where we did a rescue of a Ontario Nature Reserve. There was construction going on there, but that was a few years ago. I'm going to say 2013. And I think it was road construction happening, and there were a whole bunch of trilliums, trout lily, all the spring ephemerals. They all had to be removed, otherwise they'd be paved over by a road. That was the last, official plant rescue I did with NANPS. See, the thing about plant rescues, they require a lot of logistical planning. It's not a case of you just go on a property and take what you want, because there's a safety and health issue concerned. Because if there's construction going on and the person who's going on that property gets hurt trying to rescue these plants, then the construction company will get held liable. So you have to, I think you have to communicate to the construction company that, why you're going there first. You can't just go there automatically and rescue these plants. So you have to communicate. And I think with Ontario Nature, because it was Ontario Nature who asked NANPS at the time to help them, coordinate a plant rescue before this road construction happened. It was pre-planned days and weeks in advance. And that's my 2 cents on plant rescues.
So maybe a little bit more complicated than it seems. At least if this person is right adjacent to the property, some of those logistics may be less complicated. But yeah, one thing that I would say is, this is just for anyone, this is just information that it's useful anytime you're transplanting a plant, even if you're just transplanting it from one part of the garden to another, is as soon as you dig those roots up and those roots are exposed to air, they need to get into the ground or into some water as soon as possible. If those roots start absorbing air into the tubes that make up the vascular system of the plant, damage can be done very quickly. So you don't want those roots exposed to air for very long. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Thanks, Ryan and Adam as well. So we are nearing time. Jason, were there any other questions you noticed that you wanted to put up?
I think for the most part, we've captured the most of them.
Yeah, I think so as well.
Yeah.
If anybody has anything pressing, if you want to just drop it into the chat for the last couple minutes, or else we will wrap up.
I've posted the links for the Instagram and Facebook in the chat, so you can find the contest details at those links.
All right, so there were two questions. What if you do a dry transplant, and what about weeds?
I've not heard the word dry transplant before, so Anya, if you'd like to unmute yourself, you could explain what that is, perhaps.
Well, I've been doing a bit of transplanting. Let me just turn my room around for a sec. And I also have space in the garage. So I don't know if you saw anything other than just grain flashes. But I found that when I do a transplant and it's wet, you know, that's when the roots get damaged. But when it's dry and the plant's okay, still healthy, it's easy to sort of spread the roots out and make it all fit. And that may not be the same thing for transplanting a plant outside, but transplanting a plant inside, it definitely works. So it depends on the medium in which it's in. So I think we need to rethink. We have to actually scientifically view it. And I've not done that, but I have transplanted probably a couple hundred plants over the last few weeks. Some of them wet, some of them dry. And the ones that I did dry, and then immediately, the new term is butt chug, which is bottom watering. Sorry, couldn't resist. You just let them sit in water then, and it'll be water absorbs up. And you can almost watch the plant just revive. Because I first start watering with plain water, and then once it's been there for a while, I'll add a very low dose of, sorry, I'm pointing to where I do it. I'm at a very low dose of fertilizer. And I find that I've been quite successful. I mean, this is not a native. This is a cup and saucer vine, and I have 3 seeds. And now I have that little plant that I've already taken cuttings of and have like 4 more plants, 5 more plants. So, you know, you can do that with a lot of things. For example, I have a Dutchman's pipe I started from seed, and this will be its 3rd summer, and it's a little stick this big. But as soon as it grows, I know that I can take cuttings and root it like that. That's much faster. It's a native plant. That's why I mentioned it.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Maybe we need you to do more experiments and perhaps a resource for our website on this dry transplanting.
Hey, it's just a thought. Didn't say it was a good one.
Wonderful.
Super, Ryan. And just one more question about weeds. So I don't know if you had a chance to address weeds and if they're good, beneficial or not, if it's better to leave them in or take them out.
Well, I see the question from Karim or Karim. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. I'm not sure what the in what context. So what about weeds? Well, what about them? I mean, a weed is not a botanical definition. A weed is really just any plant that you don't want to be there. So it really is in the eye of the beholder. It's not the same thing as an invasive plant, which is an exotic species that is doing harm to an area. I'm waiting for the context about the what is the weed, but really sometimes pulling up a whole bunch of plants and disturbing the soil could be more damaging than leaving something there. So I would really ask yourself, I always, when I'm going in to do work in my garden, I always ask myself, why am I doing this? What is the purpose of this action? Whether that's watering, pulling something out, collecting seeds, like what is the benefit that's coming from this? And if I can't come up with a good reason, maybe I shouldn't be doing it in the first place. Maybe I should just be leaving it and letting nature take its course.
Good answer. Awesome. Well, I think that brings us to a close for today. I'd like to say thank you to everyone for joining us in this talk today. Thank you to Ryan from World Wildlife for joining us and presenting, as well as to all the members of the NANPS who collaborated with us for this talk. Ryan, if you had some final words, or Jason, Adam, Alice from NANPS, feel free. I just want to say that following this talk, we're looking to send a package with some information, resources, and tools, and as well as a recording of this talk for you to rewatch at your convenience. So thank you again, and I'll pass it to Ryan and NANPS to say any final words.
Sure. Well, it's been a wonderful time with this very knowledgeable and educated audience. What I'll leave you with is this. It seems a lot of you are taking individual action, planting native plants in your gardens, which is great. But if we are going to get to those huge numbers, those millions of native plants that we need to achieve real ecological restoration, then your actions need to cascade beyond your garden. So as hard as it is, I'm going to challenge you, this particular audience, to talk to your neighbors, talk to your family, talk to your friends, get it out there on social media, talk about it at neighborhood groups, or to your political representatives. Make that change happen at a larger scale. It has to ramp up to something bigger in order to be really effective.
Great. Jason or Adam, did you want to add any other words, or we are good?
I think I'm good, yes.
Yeah, just wanted to say thanks to everyone. Yeah, definitely great engagement across the comments in the polls. Ryan, great talk. Thanks again. And yeah, on behalf of everyone, just wanted to thank everyone for today. Masha, any closing comments?
No, I think we're good. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Again, as I said, we'll send you a package with all the resources and tips that people have also included in the chat. And we hope to see you at another event in the future. So take care, everyone, and have a great night. Connect soon. Bye.
Bye. And where's the